Hello.
Hello. Okay. I'm a little bit early, right? A minute.
A minute.
Okay, great.
How are you, Geshe? How is
I'm
Germany?
well. Thank you. I'm well. I'm okay.
The floods are better?
Yeah, well, we weren't affected badly by the Matul. I mean, some other places it was really bad. And where I live, there was just a little bit of flooding of the basement and there was no internet. So internet wasn't working, or it was working a little bit, but not enough to have a Zoom meeting. Yeah, but thank you for
Good.
asking. Okay.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all again. Thank you very much for joining us for another session, another teaching. Thank you, Geshe. We're so happy to have this opportunity this week again. I think that you know everything I was asked to say, so I'll just refer you to what I said last week. No need to.
Okay, sure.
Just remind you to, if you have questions, please write them to Dalit, and she will mail them to Geshe. And enjoy the teaching. Thank you, Geshe.
All right. Thank you, Deora. Okay, so just before we start, well, thank you everyone for your kind messages. My apologies that we didn't have class last week, but you've probably heard we had some issues with the internet due to the flooding, but it's all fixed now, so we can continue. And it's interesting because we were supposed to start one of the most important subject of the whole text, and we have an obstacle a week before that. So I guess it's good to have an obstacle, and hopefully that's been cleared now. Well, I had the obstacle, but we couldn't have class, of course. So anyway, yeah, let's start as usual with the meditation. Okay. So just some breathing meditation. And then, of course, in order to effectively generate the right motivation, let's visualize in the space in front of us Buddha Shakyamuni, who appears in the form of a fully ordained monk in the saffron robes of a bhikkhu. Inspiring us to follow the path that the Buddha has followed. And then think that the Buddha is surrounded by the great masters of the past. Then the Landa masters like Nagarjuna, Ayadeva, Baba Viveka, Buddha Palita, and so forth. the great masters of Tibet, the different traditions. And all the other great masters who inspire us and are an example for our own practice. Just feel their presence in the space in front of you and remember that they're all inseparable from your Lama or your Lamas. And then think that you're surrounded by all sentient beings. Whose mind is clear and knowing in its actual nature, but who are affected by the basic misapprehension of reality and therefore experience endless sufferings. Pain, confusion, fear, they're afflicted, by contaminated happiness, and carry the burden of contaminated aggregates. And so let's start by generating affectionate love, that is feeling of closeness, acceptance of each and every one, of each sentient being surrounding us. Generate affection towards all of them. Which then gives rise to great compassion, that is the affectionate attitude that wishes for all sentient beings to be free from the three types of suffering: suffering of suffering, suffering of change, and pervasive suffering. And also wishing, may I be able to lead sentient beings towards a state of liberation, freedom from those types of suffering. I be able to protect them from whatever that is in their way to attaining lasting peace and happiness. And that wish or aspiration then gives rise to, or gives way to, the special altruistic attitude, which is the determination to protect sentient beings from all that prevents them from reaching a state of liberation. So the thought, I'm determined to do whatever I can to lead sentient beings to lasting peace and the state of nirvana. And then based on the understanding that we can only live up to that if we become enlightened, become a Buddha ourselves first, let's generate the mind of enlightenment, the determination to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings surrounding us right now. And it is with this motivation, with this mind of enlightenment, that we'll study and reflect and meditate on Chandakirti's text. And so, without letting go of this motivation, let's first recite the prayers, Refuge and Bodhichitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then to strengthen our determination to do this for the welfare of all sentient beings, may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then directed at the front visualization. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. All right. Okay. Well, now for the coming week, hopefully you'll continue with what we did previously, but the focus is once again on generating the mind of enlightenment, to keep this really close. As I described last time, this should be your closest friend. This type of mind should be always somewhere nearby, and even if you forget, well, it should be easy enough to get back to it. Remember, however fake it may feel at times, but not to give up and to generate it again and again. But of course, we shouldn't just kind of go through the motion of just, generating that wish. I mean, there's more that we need to do. And what we're doing right now is actually, going through the different levels or the different stages of generating more closeness, more love, more affection towards all sentient beings. And actually, the first step is equanimity. However, I personally feel if there's no sense of closeness towards sentient beings in general, if in fact we feel more of an aversion towards those, or an indifference, total indifference towards most others, then it may be helpful to fast generate a feeling of closeness. The reason here being ourselves. So the fact that we benefit from so many others, from the existence, just the mere existence of others, other humans, other animals, so many living beings without whom we wouldn't survive. We wouldn't have become the person we're now. And we continue to evolve, we continue to develop because of all these sentient beings. If there weren't all sentient beings, what mind of enlightenment would we generate? Become enlightened for our own benefit? Well, it's not going to work. So from a worldly point of view, from a spiritual point of view, other sentient beings are so important, are so kind. Just the fact that they exist and that they need certain things, and that they provide us, of course, with food and so forth, education, etc. All right. So just generating that feeling of closeness based on what we need ourselves. Sometimes people have a sense, we're just deepening, we're just strengthening self-cherishing if we use these kind of reasons. But let's face it, we are self-cherishing, and we should work with the self-cherishing mind. So to get a sense, well, other sentient beings are beneficial. They're important. We couldn't exist without them. So that is another reason for, or another incentive, the understanding of that, another incentive to make sentient beings part of ourselves, in the sense that in the same way as we want ourselves to be happy, to slowly generate the wish for other sentient beings to have that same degree of happiness or even more happiness than ourselves. So, but still what we still do is we still distinguish, and we will distinguish for a long time to come, but we instinctively differentiate between those we like, those we don't like, and the rest of sentient beings who we are indifferent towards, who we don't care about. And so first, to generate a sense of closeness, but also understanding that these differences that we perceive, so liking some, disliking others, and not caring about the rest of sentient beings, well, the reasons for that are extremely superficial. First of all, we like certain sentient beings because temporarily they give us some benefit. We don't like others because temporarily we feel they harm us. And we don't care about the rest because we don't know them. Or even if we know them, they don't contribute to our happiness or our suffering. Now, this is so superficial in terms of the reason being, well, like I said, very superficial, having no real substance to it, if you like. I mean, it doesn't really make sense. Rather, understanding that all sentient beings have the same potential, have the same nature, in that their mind has got the same nature. It's totally pure. It's the same nature as the mind of a Buddha. And if we respect and we have faith, respect in the Buddhas, and well, in the Buddhas, we have faith in the Buddhas, well, they have the same type of mind that we all have, in that our mind is obstructed, but a Buddha's mind isn't. So to remember that whoever we meet, not only is the existence of every sentient being extremely important, but they have the same potential that we have. They have the same nature in terms of their mind, the same basic clear nature of mind, their mind not being affected in its actual nature by the afflictive emotion. So to remember that. And for this week, I would like you to do that. So whoever you meet, to appreciate, of course, the existence of that person, of that living being, and at the same time be aware whatever differences there are between sentient beings, they're totally superficial. Whether they benefit you right now or harm you, that is so, well, secondary. Primary focus should be the fact they're just like a Buddha, in that the basic nature of their mind is just as pure as the mind of a Buddha. So to remember that, if we can, again and again. And of course, based on that, in particular, when we catch ourselves feeling, oh, I like this person, I don't like that, and I don't care about the rest. So when we find ourselves to judge in that way, and as I said previously, so this is actually moving towards more of an equilibrium, a sense of equilibrium, that we're open to meeting anyone, but open in the sense of not indifference, but rather curiosity and moving towards feeling closer towards others. Okay, so hopefully it's clear. Rejoicing in the existence of anyone we meet, and of course trying to be aware of their basic nature. All right. And then if we can take it, if we go through this as part of our daily practice again and again, to generate the mind of enlightenment, of course, if we can, to not let go of that, however fake it may feel. And then to continue with the text. Actually, I received some questions. Dalit, thank you for that. Also, thank you for your other email. So the question is from Jim or Jimmy. He sent 2 questions. So I'll answer the first one, and the next, I'll leave the other one for next time, because I'm thinking it may take a little bit of time, not too long, but a few minutes to answer it. So his question is about communication in a Buddhist context. So what does it mean to communicate with another person? Can we actually communicate? He very nicely puts a definition from the Oxford Dictionary of English. So what is communication? It's the imparting or exchanging of information by speaking, writing, or using some other medium. All right. Okay, so using a certain medium and imparting information or exchanging information. So that's communication. What does it mean in a Buddhist context? And so he asks in a sense, well, his question is the mental continuum closed or open for cause and effect? Precisely, is dependent arising, so cause and effect, constrained within the same continuum? And he says, well, he thinks so. And he uses the example of karma. He believes that anything that happens to me as a person, if I understand him correctly, to me, what happens to me as a person stays within that same continuum. So there's no real communication because there's this close continuum. And his argument is, well, if I accumulate a karmic action, the result of that only I experience and no one else does. So it seems one of the main happenings of cause and effect, that is a karmic cause leading to a certain experience that is a karmic effect, that happens within one continuum. So this cause and effect kind of scenario here in terms of karma, that only taking place within this one continuum, well, that should be true for anything. And if that's true for anything, then I'm almost like living in a bubble and everyone else is living in a bubble and there's no communication. All right. So it falls away basically. And we just believe there is communication whereas there isn't. Well, I don't think that's true. I mean, definitely there is, we don't live in a bubble. In fact, we're all interdependent. And of course, your argument, Jimmy's argument saying, well, karma just happens within this one continuum, at least from the point of view of a karmic cause, then giving rise to a karmic result. That happens with the one mental continuum. Absolutely true. Definitely. If I engage in some kind of volitional action, I will experience the karmic result of that. No one else will. But that is just from the point of view, a karmic action and a karmic result. My action can still affect other people. They still affect other people. So my karmic action will possibly be a cooperative condition or a condition, something that affects the suffering in another person's mind. I mean, simple. If I kill another person, or if I rob another person, this person experiences suffering due to my act of stealing from them. However, their suffering, the suffering that rises in that person's mind from having been robbed, is not the karmic effect of my karmic action. It's an effect of my action, but not the karmic effect of my action. It's the karmic effect of an action that the person that I stole something from has accumulated in the past. But that doesn't mean that my karmic action is not a simple cause. It's not a karmic cause, but it's a cause. That's one part. So there's still an interaction. And also, if now I have my stuff stolen, that is a karmic result from a karmic action I accumulated in the past. Yes, that's just from the point of view of the continuum of me as a person. But there must be a thief. There must be another condition, a thief having the wish to steal something from me. So that's a cooperative condition that is also responsible for the fact that right now this karma for me being robbed ripens. Why does it ripen now? Well, the external causes and conditions. So it's important to understand that there are different types of causes. There are causes that take place where the result of a particular cause is part of the same continuum. But the fact that I learn things, I mean, like my knowledge in terms of being able to read and write and what I learned in school, science and mathematics and all that, it was taught by other people. Other people gave me that knowledge. So without them, it was not like just one continuum, just this imprint ripened and suddenly I knew mathematics. No, it doesn't work like that. There's definitely other people. It's there communicating with me, as it says here, imparting knowledge. And of course, I react in a certain way that again influenced my teachers and so forth. All right, so there's definitely communication. Only when it comes to a karmic cause having a karmic effect, that is limited to a single person. Okay, now I'm not talking about the Chittamatra school here. I'm talking about Prasangika, and there are other people. There's language, there are words we can hear, and so forth. So we listen to these words as an example, as one medium of communication. So verbal communication. We think about them, it affects us, and yeah, so there's definitely communication. All right, I hope this that answered your question. So from a Buddhist point of view, yes, it's not just believing we're communicating, whereas in reality we live in this bubble. No, not at all. All right, so then we can start with the text. So starting with verse, what is it, 120? Since all the various out of self, like a barren ones, it's devoid of arising. Seeing with their wisdom all the afflictions seen. The yoga engages. No, it's further up. Attachment to one's own being. No, it's, wait. Just a sec.
We've studied 119 including.
119. So seeing with the wisdom that all afflictions over stem from the, yes, so it's 120. 120. Going to my own text. Oh yeah, here it is. All right, so we start with verse 120. That is the beginning of the subject that, well, can be described as selflessness of person, or refuting the self of person, dango, or yeah, refuting a self. All right, now what does the first verse tell us? It's saying, well, as you can see, seeing with their wisdom that all afflictions and all faults stem from the identity view, grasping at the perishable collection, and knowing that self is the focus of this identity view, the yogi engages in the negation of selfhood. All right. So seeing, who is seeing it? The yogi. Yogi, a practitioner, a Buddhist practitioner, sees with their wisdom that all afflictive emotions and all the other faults, so the imprints that are left, anything that obstructs the pure nature of our mind, like I mentioned in the beginning, just as the mind of a Buddha, the mind of any sentient being, including our own mind, is completely pure in its nature. It's free from all faults, free from all misapprehension. And so temporarily, there are all these afflictions and there are other faults, and all of them have their origin in the identity view, in the view of a self. So grasping at a self, here grasping at the perishable collection, which is another word, it's another way of saying the self-grasping mind, which grasps at ourselves, our own self, to exist inherently. Okay, so in other words, the reason we have problems, the reason our mind is not the mind of a Buddha, is because we have a basic misapprehension when it comes to the I, when it comes to the self. Here, in particular, the view that is described is the view grasping at the perishable collection. That is a specific term. It's a translation, the English translation of a word in Tibetan, which, like I just said, refers to a type of self-grasping But self-grasping, not grasping at any self, I'm another person's self. For instance, I can have the wrong view. I mean, I have the wrong view. I generate again and again the wrong view that perceives another person to exist inherently. That is also a mind that grasps at a self, just not at my own self, but the self of another person. However, here we're talking about a type of self-grasping that grasps at the inherent existence of my own I. That is said to be the root. That is said to be the main cause of our suffering. Of course, this is not contradicting the fact, or it's not contradictory that also the grasping of inherent existence, grasping at the inherent existence of another person or another self, that this is also the root of all our problems. Basically, grasping at inherent existence of anything is said to be the root of all problems. But here we're focusing on grasping at the inherent existence of ourselves. Why is that? If all the other misapprehensions when it comes to inherent existence, when they're all mistaken, why is it that in particular with regard to myself, why is that mentioned here more specifically? Well, we did already in the first 119 verses, we dealt already with in the view of inherent existence when it comes to phenomena other than the self. We've basically covered that. We'll go back to it again as part of this particular section of the text. We'll go back to phenomena other than the self. But we dealt with it to a certain degree. And let's face it, although we apprehend all phenomena as inherently existent, I mean, well, they appear to us, whatever phenomenon appears to us, it appears as if existing by way of its own nature or from its own side. Although that is the case, and still there's a sense, or there's the misapprehension when it comes to the I is more of a problem, because this misapprehension of the I, perceiving the I to exist inherently, gives rise to a type of attachment to the I, which our other misapprehensions don't give rise to. In other words, although I misapprehend the inherent existence of a car, that does not give rise to the type of attachment, to a type of attachment to the car that compares in any way to the type of attachment I generate to the I. Does that make sense, what I just said? So it is a fact that out of this apprehension of an inherently existent I generate extremely strong attachment. But I don't do that with regard to other phenomena. So although I apprehend other phenomena to exist inherently, that type of attachment doesn't arise. Why? Why is that? Why do I generate such strong attachment towards the I after apprehending it to exist inherently, but not towards, I don't generate the same attachment to other people, although I could experience them in the same way as inherently existent, to other objects. The same type of attachment I don't have, not even to my own mind and body. Why is that? Well, it's difficult to communicate online, so I'm not even going to ask you. But think about it. I'll next time I'll address it again. I'll try to give you an answer. But think about it. Why is it the I? Why are we attached to the body? Why are we attached to the mind and still not have the same kind of attachment towards mind and body as we have to the self? And definitely not with regard to other phenomena. Okay. But what is clear here is its attachment to the I. That's our main problem arising out of this misapprehension. So we definitely need to deal with that. We definitely need to deal with this particular type of self-grasping. But what is it called here? This is called the identity view, or the wrong view, grasping at the perishable collection. Jigsaw la dawa. So Jigsaw la dawa means literally the view. It doesn't say identity. Thupten Jinpa just added the word identity because it deals with our own identity. But it's the view that grasps at the perishable collection. Now, first of all, you may have heard this term. It's a separate term. It's not the same term for self-grasping. It's not the same term for ignorance. There's so many different words that describe this misapprehension depending on, well, what we perceive, what we conceive in each moment, and what is the focal object. So if it's ourselves, if we apprehend an intrinsically, inherently existent I, that is described as the view grasping at the perishable collection. If I perceive apprehend the inherent existence of someone else, it's not called that. Okay, so it's just to distinguish it. Although actually apprehending another person as inherently existent is, strictly speaking, you're also grasping at a perishable collection, but it's not called that. So what does this mean? Like, what is the etymology of this term? The view of the perishable collection, you probably know about this, but just for those who don't know, what is this perishable collection? It's mind and body, the 5 aggregates, and even the conventionally existent I, even the I that does exist. And of course, you're also probably aware of that, but just for those who are not aware, of course, when we say self-grasping mind or selflessness, when we use these words, these terms, they seem to imply that there is no self. But of course, as you've heard, probably most of you by now, of course, there is a self that does exist. There is a conventional self. There's a conventional self that does exist. And of course, then there is the self that does not exist. That is a creation of our own mind that arises from a projection of our mind. We project the existence of an I that is impossible. And that misapprehension gives rise to all our trouble. Now, this existent I, we need to distinguish therefore, mind and body and the existent I, they are a collection. In that, well, we have many aggregates, so that's a collection anyway. Mind, body, different types of mind, different body parts, if you want. So there's a collection right there. But even the conventional I that is merely labeled on the basis of mind and body, that's also a collection. It's made of many parts. It's made of physical parts, of mental parts. So all this is a collection, mind, body, and even the conventional I, which is perishable in that it's impermanent, it's constantly changing. And on the basis of this, we perceive an inherently existent I. In that, what do? The existent I, we perceive to exist inherently. Okay, I need to repeat that. On the basis of something that does exist, we then perceive that to exist inherently. And we do it all the time. There is a conventional car, but at certain times, it's not there all the time. Not all the time does our mind. And here, need to be aware, it's not the sense consciousness that apprehends inherent existence. To the sense consciousness, inherent existence merely appears. But to the mental consciousness, every now and then, this appearance of inherent existence and other causes and conditions give rise to a misapprehension of reality, which actively apprehends a car that actually conventionally exists to exist inherently, or a cupboard, or a vase, or another person, or the I to exist inherently. So it's based on mind and body, based on the conventional I that we perceive ourselves to exist inherently. And that wrong mind is described as the view grasping at the perishable collection. So taking the perishable collection, mind, body, and the conventional I as the basis, and perceiving this conventional I to exist inherently. And that is the root cause. That is the root of all our troubles. And knowing that the self is the focus of this identity view, so this non-existent inherent I, that is the focus of this identity view. The yogi engages in the negation of this particular self. The yogi engages in the negation of that particular I. Okay, so I hope this is this fast verse is clear. The fast verse that describes refutation of the I, as it's usually, this chapter is usually called, or the section of the text is usually called, or just the selfnesses of person, this particular topic here. Now, if you go back to what we studied before, and sooner or later I'll do a small review of what we did before, but it wasn't so long ago that we had a small summary, so I'm not going to do it today. But you definitely, well, hopefully you remember, we dealt with the selflessness of phenomena previously, but in a slightly different way than we're going to deal with the selflessness of persons. And something else I want to talk about here, well, in the texts on Madhyamika, in the philosophical texts on Madhyamika, in fact, in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, you find 5 types of reasoning, 5 types of main reasons, main logical reasons that establish lack of inherent existence. Some of those you're very familiar with, some of those you're not familiar with. You've heard maybe most of them. Anyway, I'm going to go through them. And all these reasons are really effective. These logical reasons are really effective when it comes to establishing that the I and other phenomena do not exist in the way in which they appear to us. So in this tradition, it is said that the way to come to an understanding of reality, so Atisha talked about this in his Lamb to the Path, it is through reasoning. We have this capacity of reasoning, and it is through this that we can initially come closer, or are being led through reasoning, through logical reasoning. We are slowly led to what the Buddha was talking about when he talked of emptiness. Okay. And there are many different logical reasons that can be presented in order to understand emptiness, and there are 5 that are presented in the texts. Okay. Now, of those 5, one is the king of reasoning. So you know right away, it's the reasoning of dependent arising. That's separate. That is separate. So that's the king of reasoning. In a way, all the other reasons are affected by that reasoning. It is extremely powerful. If you were present when Yang Rinpoche taught yesterday, for instance, teaching this text by Chankya Rinpoche Dorje, which called Recognizing the Mother, His Holiness also taught it some time ago, then you're aware that the text mentions the fact that dependent arising is really a marvel. It's a wonder. In that, well, it teaches us that things arise, they do exist, they do exist, so therefore, well, they're dependently arisen, therefore they exist, they appear. But dependent arising also teaches us that it doesn't exist inherently. So basically, the concept of dependent arising teaches us the fact that something has to exist. Things exist. If something arises in dependence, it can't be non-existent. But at the same time, it also teaches us that it doesn't exist inherently, which is why we say the reasoning of dependent arising, of the 5 reasonings, the reasoning of dependent arising, it takes care of both extremes, the extreme of reification, of believing things to exist solidly and inherently and independently, and it gets rid of the extreme of nihilism. It does both, the way I described. So although it teaches us things don't exist, it shows us that things don't exist inherently, but it also shows us that nonetheless they appear. And it teaches us that they appear, but they don't have to exist inherently. So it does both. This is why it's special. Okay, that's dependent arising. But there are 4 other reasons. One reason deals with something right now, here, right now, and its parts. the things, its parts, that which is made of. That's one reasoning. The other three reasonings don't deal with the parts it's made of, but it deals with its causes, what gives rise to it. So it deals with cause and effect. Having talked of selflessness of phenomena, which reasoning of these five reasonings, which of those did we deal with? Well, in a sense, dependent arising has always been there, has always been present, but we haven't really dealt with the reasoning of parts. Not as, well, the text itself didn't deal with that, but it dealt with how do things arise. And one of those three reasons, so one reason deals with dependent arising, one with the parts of something, and then three deal with cause and effect. Well, the reasoning we dealt with is called the diamond splitter reasoning. Okay, so the fact that a result doesn't arise from itself, nor from something inherently other. It doesn't exist from something, it doesn't exist from both, from something that is the same and inherently different, nor does anything that is impermanent arises without a cause. This we dealt with extensively as part of the first part of the 6th chapter, Selflessness of Phenomena. It didn't mention really parts. We did talk about it in our discussions. However, the text does not mainly deal with it. Now, the second part doesn't deal with the arisal of phenomena. It doesn't deal with the diamond splitter reasoning. It doesn't really explicitly set this forth, but it deals with parts. Okay. Now, just for the sake of completion, what are these five reasons? First reason I mentioned, reasoning of dependent arising. The second reason is the diamond splitter reasoning. I don't need to talk about that again. Then there are two further reasons that there are logical reasonings establishing that phenomena do not arise inherently. So it doesn't deal with their existence right now, but rather they don't inherently come into existence. Okay, so what is the second reason of those three of the five, the three reasons that deal with the arisal or the production of something? Well, the reasoning that negates production regarding existence and non-existence. In other words, it's basically saying, well, a result such as a seedling has not been inherently produced while existing at the time of its cause, and it has not been inherently produced while not existing at its cause. Okay, it's again this idea of like, well, cause and effect, do they exist at the same time or not? But even if they don't exist, so of course something cannot be produced while it exists at the time of its cause. No need to mention that, because that would mean that something arises from itself. But not only that is impossible, even not existing at the time of its cause, it cannot be inherently produced, and we've already heard that implicitly, well, then it can never come into existence because it's not there at all. So how can it come into existence if it was inherently created, if it exists inherently, and so forth? So we've already dealt with this to a certain degree, and this reasoning anyway is not really mentioned in much detail, or is not dealt with in the same way as this diamond splitter reasoning. And then there's a third reasoning that also deals with production, that is the reasoning that refutes the four possibilities of production. It's not the diamond splitter, but another four possibilities, that many results are created by a single cause. Okay, so a result or a cause, none of those exist inherently, because you can't have many causes arising, many results arising from just one cause. It's impossible. You never have just one cause giving rise to many results. But you also can't have many causes giving rise to just one result. That's also impossible. And you never have just one cause and one result. Impossible. And there's no inherent production, even from the point of view of many results being produced by many causes. Okay, so actually, the first three that are negated you don't have to add the word inherently produced, because it's just impossible. It's an impossibility that you can have many results from just one cause, or many causes in just one result, or just one cause and just one result. That's impossible. It's always many causes giving rise to many results. That's conventionally realistic. But even in that case, there's no inherent production. So all four are being negated. Okay, I hope that's clear. If not, you can always ask, send an email to Dalit if I need to explain this further. So these are the three types, the diamond splitter reasoning, and the other two I just explained. And then there's one more left that we now deal with as part of negating the I. That is the reasoning which refutes inherently existing as one and as many. In Tibetan, the wording is a little bit more convenient, because in Tibetan, you can express this in two different ways. You can say, for instance, the I doesn't exist inherently because it's neither inherently one nor inherently many. You can express it that way in Tibetan. It makes total sense. And in English, of course, you can express it that same way. But you can also use the same words and then say the I doesn't exist as being one with its parts. So you add the parts. You don't just say the I doesn't exist as inherently one, but also the I doesn't exist as being inherently one with its parts. So one with something else. And the I doesn't exist as being inherently many, or inherently different from its parts. So in Tibetan, you use the same word here for different. It's not inherently different, or not inherently different from its parts. Okay, or you can say it's not inherently many, not inherently different, and not inherently different from its parts. So whichever way you put it, and that is the reasoning that we usually apply, the reasoning of refuting inherently existent one, or being inherently existent different. Okay, that is refuted here in the sense, if we look at the I, is it one? Is it many? It's neither inherently one, nor is it inherently many. And then in relation to its parts, does it exist as one with the mind and the body, or does it exist as totally separate from mind and body? That's the analysis we do. So everything we will do from now on, it's this type of analysis. And you use the chariot. You use, a chariot, that's the example given here. Of course, it's an old-fashioned kind of means of transport. Nowadays, you could maybe use a car, taking apart a car. What is the car? Is it one with its parts, and so forth, which is a little easier initially versus taking the I, because the parts of a car are more obvious, or the parts of a chariot are more obvious to us than the parts of the self. But the reasoning works in the same way. And so you see that the reasoning that is used for selflessness of phenomena has more to do with the arisal of something, and the reasoning that is used for the analysis of the selflessness of the I is the reasoning that deals with the parts. What is the relationship between the I and its parts? But actually, that's just explicitly how it's presented here, but you can switch it. I mean, the point is that when you meditate, you apply these reasonings to phenomena, to self, to, any type of object, really, not just to the I. So when we talk about perceiving an inherently existent I, where's that I? Is that I one with its part or separate from its part? Or how has this I arisen from itself, from other, and so forth? Okay. And this will be also clear later on. First, it deals with the I. Is it one with its part different from its parts? We have the chariot. We deal with that. And then later on, the text goes on to say, now you can apply it to all phenomena. How about a vase? How about cause and effect? And so forth. All right. So some of you may have known this before, but just for those who didn't, just this brief explanation. All right. So usually I don't give you the outlines. Lama Tsongkhapa, of course, in his text illuminating, illuminating the intent, he gives a lot of outlines, which are extremely beneficial. But really, just if you study this commentary in great detail, which we don't have the time to do. I mean, we study Chandrakirti's text, but we don't study Lama Tsongkhapa's text. And his outlines are so helpful, especially when you memorize them. When you memorize them, memorization helps to also gain some understanding. You kind of order these outlines. You kind of order them in your own mind. You put them into certain places. It all kind of comes together, if you like. I mean, not on fast memorizing them. You have to repeat it over and over and over and over again. And every time you do it, it becomes a little clearer through memorizing. Oh, this is this, this is this, this is that. So if you don't do that, it can be really confusing. Especially if I just mention outlines all the time and you get confused over them. But sometimes I like to point them out, and this is the case here when Lama Tsongkhapa starts this particular section on the selfnesses of persons by saying, first, showing how the seeker of liberation, so those aspiring towards liberation, must first negate intrinsic existence of the self. That's the first part we're dealing with. And then the second part is, having understood that, now negating the intrinsic existence of I and mine. Not just of the I, but also that which is mine. I'm not just grasping at I, I'm mainly grasping at I, I'm attached to I, but then that gives rise to grasping at mine, or being attached to mine. And then extending the analysis of self and chariot to others. So this analysis of the self based on the example of a chariot or a car, and then extending that to other phenomena, not just the I. Okay. And the first verse we read today, the first verse we did, deals exactly with this, showing how a person who seeks liberation first has to negate intrinsic existence of the self. Okay. All right. So as it is customary, when you start a new topic, you don't start racing through the first verses. You kind of give some introduction, like some explanation, and I hope I'm able to give you the background of why this is important and so forth. And I believe I've done this to a certain degree now, so we can continue. But just one more time. So the first verse is really saying that all our problems, in other words, our afflictions and all the sufferings that arise from our afflictions, they come from our misapprehension when it comes to I. Okay. And mine, of course, by extension. And so by analyzing this focus, like this I, this I that we apprehend to be inherently existent, well, if we understand that we focus on this, now as practitioners, we need to engage in the negation of that self. All right, that's the first verse. And why is it? Of course, and Lama Tsongkhapa gives some explanation. Well, it's the root of all our problems. And if you want to get rid of a poisonous tree, well, you can't continue cutting off the leaves and the branches. You have to cut off the root. And he gives an example. He gives a quote. Lama Tsongkhapa gives a quote from the Secrets of the Sattagata Sutra, which basically talks about exactly that. We need to get at the root of our problem. So what does that mean for our daily practice? Of course, we should still apply the antidotes, which is like cutting the leaves and branches. Like when we get angry, generate love and compassion. When we feel ourselves to be stingy, well, to practice generosity. Or what else? When we feel too attached to something, to think of the negative aspects of this object, and so forth. So these temporary antidotes will not totally get rid of our afflictive emotions, but we can easily do them. It doesn't take much time or it's not that difficult to apply them. So we should practice them, but in the back of our mind, always be aware The actual troublemaker is that basic misapprehension. That's what we need to get at sooner and better. Well, sooner or later, and better sooner than later. So therefore, as part of our practice, and of course, this is just, I'm just repeating what I've said many times and really just saying what is homeless says, the center of our practice should be bodhicitta. And hopefully this has become the center of our practice, since that's your homework for the whole week. But of course, emptiness, which is the main topic of this particular text here. And so to become aware when the problems arise, when a situation arises, emptiness should not be far away. To also, especially if there's a situation that causes you difficulties. So in our daily life, let's face it, we all have difficulties, no matter how great the situation of your neighbor, of your friend, of your relative seem. Forget it. If they have no problem, they're just pretending, or they're maybe spiritually highly evolved. That's another possibility. But if anyone who's just an ordinary person pretends they don't have problem, well, then either they're lying or they have found a really good way to deal with these problems. And well, what is a problem to us is no longer a problem to them, but that shows they already found on a spiritual level a way to deal with them. And what is the way to deal with problems? The way to deal with problems is, one, to apply the temporary antidotes, but also to reflect on the situation and bring emptiness into it. Bring emptiness of the situation. Does it exist inherently? Is it a problem because I call it that, or is it a problem from its own side? What about the other person that I describe as the troublemaker? Usually it's another person that I make responsible for my trouble. So how does this person exist? What makes the troublemaker a troublemaker, from his or her own side or not? And how about myself, the victim, the person now being, and so forth. So it's not that difficult. Just analyze, what is the I that's being hurt? Am I just perceiving something extra or not? And so forth. All right. So having said all this, let's go into now negating intrinsic existence of I and mine, that first outline. And again, it starts out with another outline. There's 6 outlines, but now I'm worried I confuse you. So I'll just start with the first of those 6 that are to follow, that are part of negating an intrinsic existence of I and mine. So negating a self that is different from the aggregates as postulated by non-Buddhist schools. That is the first section we deal with. So negating a self that is different from mind and body, which is described, which is accepted by many non-Buddhist schools. That is followed by negating the aggregates, mind and body, as the self, which is postulated, which is accepted by other Buddhist schools. So we're already starting to look at the I, and so what is this I? What is this basis for me thinking I all day long? Honestly, it's all day long. And although not every thought I is a misapprehension, okay? So not every mind that thinks I, not every time I think I need to go, I need to do this. It's not always a wrong view, but it's never far away, in that a slight trigger, a harmful action, like someone harming me, insulting me, or whatever, very easily gives rise to the thought I that is an unrealistic view of I. It's there most of the time. Sorry, I just have to, my phone is going crazy. Okay. So it's never really far away, and it rises again and again. Now, not just the Buddhists, but also non-Buddhists have dealt with that. And here I'm saying non-Buddhists, not non-Buddhists like in any country, anywhere in the world. No, and specifically in India, especially before Buddhism came into existence and even after, there were many philosophical schools who dealt with the idea and still exist, who are dealing with the idea of a self. What is the I? How does the self exist? It's very interesting because there's no other country. I mean, they have great philosophers of Greece and of other countries, their philosophies and religions and so forth, but no country other than India has spent that much time with trying to identify Atman and understanding that somehow our suffering relates to Atman, whether it exists or it doesn't exist. Well, the most non-Buddhist schools do accept the existence of Atman, and well, not really blaming the I or Atman for our problems, but being aware of the attachment and desire and so forth being the root of all our troubles. So very clearly spelling it out. So this is very unusual to India. And so no wonder Buddha describing or teaching selflessness, he did so in India. Perfect place to talk about the I and how it exists and so forth, or how it doesn't exist, etc. All right, so but what is it in the non-Buddhist schools? They all talk about the I, how the I is involved in samsara and nirvana and so forth, but they describe an I which Buddhists don't accept. They accept an I that exists separate from mind and body. So it's very interesting because we're trying to eliminate an extreme view, two extreme views when it comes to the I. So the analysis of the I in relation to mind and body, because of course, where are we going to look for the inherently existent I that appears to us? We're trying to find that. It's not enough just to say it doesn't exist. We need to come to a first-hand experience not being able to find it. There's no other way. So the Buddha just telling us, oh, it doesn't exist, it's not going to help. It's not going to help. We need to experience this ourselves, that this I cannot be found. Unless we do that, unless we come to the conclusion ourselves, I really can't find it. Unless we do that, we won't understand selflessness of the I. So the first step is really to pretend it's there, to assume it's there, and to look for it, to look for that I. And since the I can only be found as part of mind and body, well, it's in relation to the mind and the body that we look for it. So either it exists as separate from mind and body or as one with mind and body. And interestingly, non-Buddhist philosophical systems of India that we're dealing with here, they all accepted philosophically laid out an I that exists separate from mind and body. The Buddhist philosophical schools that are the lower schools that are below the Prasangika school, they all accepted an I that is the aggregates or is one of the aggregates. Therefore, our analysis takes us fast to the non-Buddhist view and then to the non-Buddhist schools and then to the the lower Buddhist philosophical schools. All right, sorry, I keep checking my watch just to be sure I don't go on for too long. So starting with negating a self that is different from the aggregates as postulated by non-Buddhist schools. Okay, so that self that is asserted is the consumer. It consumes things, it utilizes things. It's a permanent entity. It's a non-creator. It doesn't create anything. It is devoid of qualities and inactive. That is what the Tirthikas, or the non-Buddhist philosophical schools postulate. Now, this is really the Samkhya school. It's a Buddhist philosophical school called the Samkhya school. And some of their assertions, they're like, oh, difficult to understand, really. I mean, not all of them. They believe there is an I. They believe there is an I that utilizes things. That's the consumer of things. They believe that there's an I that's a permanent entity. Okay, all right, that still makes sense. So consumer, okay, that which utilizes, well, which enjoys or uses mind and body. Okay, it's permanent, all right. A non-creator, that's this idea in the Samkhya school that that which creates is this primordial substance, as it's called. It's not a creator. It's a creator. So this primal substance, from everything arises from this primal substance, but that's not the I. So this primal, what is it called? The fundamental substance or primary substance. Everything arises from that, and it doesn't arise from the I. Therefore, the I doesn't create anything. Okay. It is devoid of the qualities. So there are 3 qualities. Lama Tsongkhapa mentions them. The quality of, what is it? The quality of, what he mentions it here. Activity and purity and indifference. No, sorry, again. Activity, darkness, and purity. So that just refers to the qualities of pleasure, pain, and indifference. So neutral indifference, so pleasure, pain, and that which is neither. So the feeling of that which is neither. Those are the 3 qualities, really, and the self is none of those. And it's inert because it doesn't act. Why does it not act? Because it's always the same. So something that acts is changing, but it's inert, it's inactive because it never acts. Why? Because it is permanent. So to summarize, the I that they assert is a permanent I, non-changing, has no parts, no qualities, no parts, and exists independent of mind and body. That kind of self is, if you summarize the view of the Samkhyas, for instance, you were to ask a Samkhya person, what is the I? That's what they would accept. And from a Buddhist point of view, such an I is impossible. It's simple because, well, first of all, existing independent of mind and body. How could the I exist independent of mind and body? There's a strong relationship to mind and body. If my mind meditates, the I meditates. If my legs move, the I moves. If the body ages, the person, the self, it ages. And based on that, of course, it's also not permanent. How can it be permanent? And if it's related to mind and body, doesn't exist totally independent of them, and it's changing, it's certainly not partless. Otherwise, I couldn't be talking of my arm, my leg, my mind, my body. But it may feel at times, so this is the philosophical view that is set forth here in order to explain the Buddhist view. But what is so nice about this, it's like to check my own mind. Do I have a sense there is like a totally separate I? Yes, there is at times. There is at times this feeling, certain situation, there's a totally separate I. The I is permanent. There's a sense, well, the I that got up this morning and the I that is still sitting here, it's been up since this morning, it's the same I. So we do have a sense of a permanent I, of a separate entity. And partless or not, well, that's more of a philosophical question, but it's not hard to assume that such an I exists. So on the intellectual kind of philosophical level, yeah, based on the way the I appears, we can come up with such an extreme view. And you find ideas of a soul, right? The soul, the way it's explained, sometimes it seems to be talking about a permanent partless I. Or I don't know much about Sigmund Freud's ego and superego, but it'd be interesting to analyze, is this also some kind of permanent partless entity? Anyway, enough for today. Great. So I'm a little bit late. I've gone over time a little bit, but that should be okay for now. So let's now do a little bit of meditation on what we learned today. Again, of course, with regard to the self, starting with some breathing meditation. So to let go of any disruptive thoughts, to just empty the mind so that we're ready to do some analytical meditation. And so what Chandrakirti teaches us is that the root of all our problems, of all our afflictive emotions, of everything that prevents us from being liberated or enlightened, is the misapprehension of the I, as well as other phenomena. But of those, it is mainly the view of an inherently existent me or I. The view of the perishable collection. That gives rise to a very powerful type of attachment. Attachment to the I. Which is more powerful than attachment to other phenomena. But this attachment is actually attached to an I, the way we perceive it, an inherently existent I. Even though the texts may tell us that the object of this attachment, that is also called self-centeredness, that its object, the inherent I, doesn't exist. But just hearing that, being told that it doesn't exist, is not at all enough. We have to come to this inside ourselves through our own experience, come to the conclusion that such an I cannot be found. And actually, as to its existence, if hypothetically there was such an independent, inherent I, it could only be found in relation to mind and body. Since that's how it appears to us, somehow connected to the body or to the mind. It may arise when someone physically injures us. When someone bumps into us, there's the thought, I. Sense there's something substantially, independently there called the I. That someone bumped into. That someone hurt. Or when we're insulted, verbally insulted, the sense that there is an I whose feelings were hurt. Therefore, the I can only exist as separate from mind and body, or as one with mind and body. That is, as inseparable from mind and body. There's no third possibility. If such an independent I, the way it appears to us, actually existed. And now we need to analyze those two possibilities to come to a fast-hand conclusion. That both possibilities do not make any sense. And the first possibility of a separate I is set forth by many non-Buddhist schools. Who believe that there is a independent, permanent, partless entity called the I. But how can the I be unchanging when mind and body transform and are different from moment to moment? How could the I exist independent of mind and body? If we say the I has grown old because the body became old, when the I meditates due to the mind meditating, and anyway, that would mean I could remove mind and body and still be left with a permanent, partless I. So now to conclude this short analysis, spend a few moments just focusing on whatever insight, whatever feeling has been generated as a result of this analysis, and spend a few moments single-pointedly focusing on that. And then let's dedicate whatever virtue we've accumulated together here, studying this text, meditating on those verses. May they result in the long life of our lamas, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And may they eventually result in our own enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. But also affect, even here, right now, all the beings around us, those who are sick like Tali Lubin, who have mental problems, who suffer from calamities, who suffer from disease, the pandemic and so forth, from poverty. May our virtue help those beings, and that their suffering may be reduced. And the way described by Shantideva in his dedication prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with the toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so it's a little after 10 minutes after 8:30, so please remember what to do this coming week, despite generating, of course, bodhicitta and appreciating the existence of others, but also become aware of all sentient beings being equal in that they have the same nature, the nature of the mind is the same as that of a Buddha. And that way, all of them have the potential to become a Buddha themselves. All right. Have a great week, and
Thank you.
see you next Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye,
Geshe-ma.
everyone.
Thank you, Geshe-ma.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.